EVE Online. This is my story. A new character was created, and his name, Lord Hedge. As many before him, and many after, Lord Hedge had big dreams and big ideas, and wanted to become a predominant figure in the New Eden universe. He was well aware that it wasn't going to be easy, and he had very difficult challenges ahead of him. The final chapter. As we were making our transition to null-sec, just before this, it was crazy times for EVE Online. Players that were playing the game at this time will remember these incidences very well. It was the patch that released the next door, and the monocles, and a rather unfortunate internal email from CCP was leaked to the public. Many players were concerned about the future of EVE Online, and as a display of their dissatisfaction with recent events, they begun to riot in the game. It was like nothing I've ever seen before in any game. In the main areas of the game, in the trade hubs, Amar and Jeddah, players begun to protest, and they did this by attacking the statues in the game for several hours. And it wasn't a small protest. There were thousands and thousands of players participating. Fortunately, CCP, very concerned, called an emergency meeting and called in the entire CSM to work out the issue. I personally seen this as a good move and a show of respect to the player base, and after a short period of time, things went back to normal in the game. On Hegemony Research's front, we were just about to explore what NPC null-sec space had to offer us. My only concern was the original debate me and Chairman Imes had, and that was he didn't think that NPC null-sec was very lucrative, and I had the same concern. But, pleasantly, I was quite wrong. In the beginning, I fit up a Drake and tested out ratting in the belts, and I understood that that was, somewhat of a lucrative thing to do. After a couple of hours of ratting in the belt, I was able to net myself about 100 million ISK, and I consider that to be a pretty good success. On top of ratting in the belt, we also had access to sites similar to sleepers. You'd scan them, and there would be regular sites with regular NPC enemies to fight, and those usually net about 40 million per site, so those were good. So, sometimes while doing these events, some special things would happen, and that would be, for example, when you're ratting in the belt, you would get a hauler spawn, and after you killed the industrial NPC ships, there would be sometimes up to 75 million to up to 500 million ISK worth of ore inside of those ships. Also in the belts, sometimes you get high-level officer spawns, and if you kill those guys and pick up their loot, that's where you get some of the commander level gear, and that stuff sells for a fortune on the market. So there were very lucrative things going on. Another thing that would happen is sometimes when you'd fight those sites, you would get an escalation in another system, and if you go fight those, you would usually get drops that are worth a ton, and sometimes you get things like Vindicator blueprints and high level loot. These are just some of the activities that we were participating in. And just as we were settling in and making good contact with the other friendly alliances in our local area, we kind of ran into a bit of a hiccup. Very shortly after CCP released the patch to allow players to run and operate their own customs offices. An alliance that we were on talking terms with, that we were not blue with, sweeped in and set up customs offices on every single planet in the system that we operated in. And they only had one corp in that system at the time, and they left shortly after they put down the customs offices. And because we did so much planetary interaction, me and Omega, we were infuriated. You might think, what's the big deal? Why are you so mad? Well, it's because the alliance that set those customs offices up were not even blue to us. And we were paying them a 5% tax rate every time we did our planetary interaction. I just didn't see it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why we allowed it to happen. Prior to this, our alliance were making deals and figuring out, okay, well, how are we going to get the parts up here to set up these customs offices? And I was like, well, I've got a jump freighter. I will get all this stuff in here immediately. And we couldn't settle on a deal, like who gets what planets. And while we were squabbling and weren't looking or kind of doing our own thing, the alliance that wasn't blue to us swept in with their capitals, took down the NPC customs offices, and set up the customs offices in the system, and then took off. Because the tax rate was set so low, we didn't look at it as too much of a problem, and we kind of backed off the situation. This is the point where Hegemony Research would do its final grand plan. We decided that we wanted to overproduce POS fuel in a very large way. We had access to an ice field in system and all the planets needed to make every type of POS fuel. So we got to work. And in a huge way, Omega and Roland with their 6 characters, Lord Hedge and Karen and Neo, I've created several alts to do PI, just as much PI as Omega and Roland were doing. We had 14 characters doing PI simultaneously. My daily chore became I would log in, I would hop on Hedge and Karen, and I would do dual boxing to get their PI done, then my 2 alts, and then 2 more alts. And that was my daily activity, and Omega was doing the same. On top of that, we would set up ice mining ops, and we would ice mine like freaks. I think with just those activities, we were at about 2 billion ISK a week. Not including other activities like ratting the belts, mining in the belts, and hitting the sites in the system. We were definitely in our prime time. With all this fuel being produced and our activities, hitting the sites, getting commander drops, we needed to be able to get those back into high-sec and sell them. So I needed to learn the art of jumping my jump freighter back and forth through high-sec and null-sec safely. So I needed to create 2 more characters that can light Sinos in null-sec and on the border of high-sec. And it was basically 2 jumps in and 2 jumps out. And I tell you, man, the fuel for the jump freighter is not cheap. The freighter's expensive and the fuel's expensive. Fortunately, I decided to do some mining in high-sec for the ice type for my freighter, which is the Amar freighter, the Ark. With that thing being so valuable and so high priority of a target, I was extremely careful with that thing. I would scout for hours and hours. I would wait till downtime and just before downtime or just after the server came back to jump my freighter, because taking a loss of 7 billion is completely unacceptable. Just as I'm getting the hang of jump operations, we get engaged in a war, and I had to keep my jump freighter in a hangar during that entire time. I did not want to risk it. I did do some mining right before the war started, and I didn't know that players could go to locator agents and seek you out, and I was just gonna mine right before the beginning of the war, and I was just gonna hang her up. But I was mining as the timer passed, and this clever guy was on top of me and had both my ships destroyed, and it was crazy. Some people are very efficient at this game. With the war going on, I pretty much decided to just hang out in null-sec, and at no time during the entire war did any war targets enter null-sec. It was during this time that I discussed and talked with Damnation about joining them in some roams around the local null-sec area. Damnation was pretty much the dominant alliance in the local area that we were friendly with. And I was pretty happy that I was becoming friendly with their leadership, because they turned out to be very cool people. And so, with the help of Damnation, I went on my very first roam. It was exciting, and I was happy to be a part of it, as I really wanted to explore this aspect of EVE Online. Even better, I didn't come out empty-handed. We got into a few engagements, and I got several kill mails during the roam. It was a lot of fun. So after doing my first roam and using all the skills that I've acquired during my wormhole days, I was ready to get into some fights. After all, I wanted to apply some of the skills that I had learned throughout my wormhole days, and during that time you had to learn how to be very stealthy and efficient. Things that I had were like max recon skills, and I had skills to fly a heavy warp interdictor ship. So I was looking to get into something interesting and some interesting scrapes. And they did occur from time to time, but nothing really that epic. One thing that I got to participate in that I thought was a lot of fun was the organized player-operated station bash. We set up with Dark Knights of New Eden, Damnation, and a couple of guys. There was an unwanted posse in the pipe, so we went ahead and engaged them and destroyed their tower. The leadership of Dark Knights of New Eden began to crumble as Landacron and Bruce, the leaders of Dark Knights of New Eden, left the game. Over a short period of time, there was a bit of a power struggle, it seemed like, in Dark Knights of New Eden, but we were so new, we pretty much stayed out of the entire thing. Eventually, the appointed leader, Dent Marvin, stepped up and took control of Dark Knights of New Eden, and I'm really glad he did, and things started to settle down and start moving forward as they should have. For the third and final time, I decided to build up Hegemony's fleet once again. So with the sales of fuel, this was pretty much not a problem. I, in the beginning, got myself an Archon and a Phoenix, but fortunately for me, I was actually given a Chimera by a random player in the game. Just some random guy on our TeamSpeak just happened to be on that night and was asking if somebody wanted a free capital ship. And of course I was like, me? The guy was really drunk, a pretty standard common thing among EVE players. And I thought he was kidding. The next day, contract, free Chimera. Oh yeah. There was a bit of shifting around with corporations and some members in different alliances in the system that we were in. And some new people moved in to take over for somebody who decided to just randomly quit the game, and Damnation was pretty upset about that, but they handled it quite well, and I'm glad that the people that did actually come in came in, because they became my favorite people that I've ever encountered in EVE Online. Two of the people that I enjoy's company particularly I affectionately called AC and Bob. AC is the kind, diplomatic type, and usually the person that would help solve a lot of the problems inside of Damnation and surrounding Damnation. She would always listen to the things that you would have to say, even if she didn't want to. She was just one of those kind of people. Very nice and very kind. Bob was unique among others that I've encountered in EVE Online. He had a razor-sharp personality. He told you how it was, and that's just the way it was going to be. I have nothing but respect for these two players, and from time to time, I still check in and see how they're doing. And this brings us to Hegemony Research's final act. I set it upon myself to fix the broken customs office situation. I started off by contacting our leadership of Dark Knights of New Eden, Dent Marvin, and asked him would he be okay if I set up and operated all the customs offices in the system that we were operating out of. The answer was a solid yes. Next, I contacted the leadership of Damnation, the other dominant alliance that operated out of this system, and I asked them basically the same question. Would you be okay if Hegemony Research owned and operated all the customs offices in this system? With the added benefit that our alliance and your alliance would have a 0% tax rate on those planets. Damnation was perfectly happy to go along with this, but they still wanted to check into the background of who actually owned those customs offices. And it turned out that 2 of the customs offices were owned by a single player in his own corporation with no affiliation. The others was a different corporation that had broken off from their alliance and were acting on their own. And so I was given the green light. My first step in the process to get this situation worked out. I wrote an email to the leadership of both corporations offering them $100 million for each customs office, and I waited their reply. And so, diplomacy had prevailed once again, I got in contact with the leadership of their corporation, made the offer, it was accepted, and they sent a member to head over into our system to switch ownership of each of the customs offices that they had control of. I was told that the other 2 customs offices that was owned by the other corporation in no way was going to ever accept my deal. So I did what had to be done and took them down with my dreadnought. Of course, with the assistance of the Alliance members, it was a good old day. We had a lot of fun, lots of laughs, and we gained control over all the customs offices in our system. So how does one measure success in EVE Online? Some might say it's the amount of wealth you've accumulated during your time with the game. Others might say it's how many kills fill your kill board in the end. For me, it was the journey, and the good friends that I've made along the way. Whatever your idea of success, for those who have played the game of EVE Online, friend or enemy, have their own story to tell, and this was mine.